Hello guys, this is your friend Itachi Fanfic 3.0 and we are back a new fanfic story which is What If the King of a Broken Age Part 1. Let's start fanfic without wasting more time. Long before history learned how to remember him as a hero, the world learned how to fear him as a king. Naruto Uzumaki sat upon a throne that was never meant to be comfortable. It was forged not from gold, but from memory, sharpened memories, like blades stacked upon one another, each one a reminder of wars won, friends lost, and promises that could never be undone. The throne rose behind him like a forest of swords, ancient and dark, as if the world itself had tried to stand up and strike him, only to fail and freeze in that moment forever. He did not lean back. Kings who leaned back forgot why they ruled. His hands rested on the armrests, relaxed but ready, fingers marked with old scars that no healer could erase. His blue eyes, once bright with reckless hope, now carried the stillness of oceans that had swallowed too many storms. These were not the eyes of a boy who wanted acknowledgement. These were the eyes of a man who had learned the cost of being acknowledged by the world. The world had asked him to become something more. And it had paid the price for it. Naruto Uzumaki had not sought the crown. The crown had sought him. After the Fourth Great Shinobi War, the villages spoke of peace as if it were a destination, not a fragile agreement balanced on grief. Treaties were signed. Hands were shaken. Smiles were worn like masks over old hatred. For a time, it worked. Or at least, it pretended to. But peace, Naruto learned, was loud when it broke. Small conflicts grew into quiet rebellions. Borders blurred. Old clans whispered that the age of hidden villages had ended, that shinobi should no longer bow to kage who argued instead of acted. Power shifted not with explosions, but with influence. And in every conversation, spoken or unspoken, one name carried weight. Naruto. The hero of the war. The child of prophecy. The man who held all tailed beasts together by choice, not chains. When leaders failed, they looked at him. When armies hesitated, they waited for him. When nations feared collapse, they asked one question. What does Naruto Uzumaki think? At first, he refused. He remembered Jiraiya's laughter, Kakashi's quiet warnings, Tsunade's tired eyes. He remembered Sasuke standing beside him, not beneath him. He remembered a world where strength existed to protect, not to rule. But the world no longer remembered those things the same way. Assassinations began. Subtle at first. Council members vanished. Clans were erased without banners or battles. Every time Naruto stepped in as a mediator, both sides obeyed him. Not out of respect. Out of fear. Fear of what he could do if he stopped smiling. That was when Naruto understood the truth that no one wanted to say aloud. Peace needed a spine. And the world had chosen him to be it. The coronation was quiet. No cheers. No festivals. Only leaders standing in a circle, each one knowing they were surrendering something they would never get back. Power centralized. Armies unified. The shinobi system restructured under a single authority. Not a Hokage. A king. Naruto did not wear a crown of jewels. He wore a coat of deep red, embroidered with symbols older than any village, symbols of unity, sacrifice, and absolute responsibility. A sword rested near his throne, not because he needed it, but because the world needed to remember he could still draw it. From that day onward, history split into two eras. Before the king, after the king, and now, years later, Naruto sat in silence, ruling an age that no longer burned, but no longer dreamed either. Reports arrived daily. Rebellions crushed before they ignited. Rogue shinobi eliminated without trial. Experiments in forbidden chakra shut down with decisive force. The world was stable. Too stable. Stability, Naruto had learned, often hid decay beneath it. He could feel it. A pressure at the edge of his senses, like the world holding its breath. Kurama, long silent within him, stirred occasionally, not with rage, but with unease. You feel it too, Naruto once murmured into the empty hall. The throne room never answered. Because kings were not meant to be answered. Deep beneath the peace he enforced, something ancient was moving. Not a village. Not a nation. Something older than the shinobi system itself. A power that remembered a time before chakra was divided, before humanity learned to borrow strength instead of earning it. And it was watching Naruto Uzumaki very carefully. Because kings who carried absolute power always attracted one thing: a challenge. Naruto did not know yet that the crown he wore was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning of his final test. And the world, for all its silence, was about to speak again. Naruto Uzumaki had learned that silence was heavier than noise. In the early years of his rule, he believed silence meant peace. No screams. No explosions. No villages burning in the distance. But as time passed, silence revealed its true nature. It was not empty. It was watching. Waiting. Remembering everything the world refused to say aloud. He sat on the throne not because he enjoyed authority, but because standing away from it felt like abandonment. Every decision passed through him. A border dispute between lands that once belonged to rival villages. A clan demanding independence after generations of loyalty. A hidden sect experimenting with chakra beyond human limits. Naruto listened to them all, his expression calm, unreadable. His words were few, but when they came, they ended arguments that had lasted decades. The world called it justice. Naruto called it necessity. He did not delude himself into believing he was loved. Love was fragile. Love questioned. Love hesitated. The world did not hesitate with him. Children were taught his name before they learned the history of their own villages. Statues of past Kage were slowly replaced by monuments symbolizing unity, symbols that quietly pointed back to a single figure. Naruto never ordered it. He never stopped it either. Power had a way of reshaping reality without permission. Sometimes, as he looked across the vast hall, Naruto wondered what his younger self would think if he could see him now. The boy who begged for acknowledgement had become the man the world feared disappointing. And that irony tasted bitter. Kurama remained silent within him, not imprisoned, not chained, merely observing. The fox had seen empires rise and fall long before Naruto was born. When Kurama chose silence, it meant something was wrong. Naruto felt it in his bones. The balance of chakra across the world had changed. Not weakened. Not strengthened. Centralized. Once, chakra flowed like rivers branching endlessly, shaped by emotion, conflict, and will. Now it moved like an ocean under one moon, pulled subtly toward a single presence. Toward him. Naruto had not intended this. He had never demanded devotion, never claimed divinity. Yet every treaty, every oath, every peace agreement tied itself to his existence. The world's stability depended on him remaining alive, rational, and willing to rule. That dependency terrified him more than any enemy ever had. What would happen if he fell? The question haunted him, because he knew the answer. The world would fracture instantly. And so Naruto remained on the throne, not as a king who ruled, but as a pillar holding up a structure already beginning to crack. There were days he wanted to leave. To disappear beyond the borders, to become a wanderer again, answering only to the wind and his conscience. But each time the thought formed, reality crushed it. Kings did not have the luxury of escape. Late one evening, though time had lost meaning within the capital, Naruto received a report that did not follow the usual patterns. No rebellion. No assassination attempt. No political maneuver. It was a pattern of absence. Entire regions where chakra behaved incorrectly. Shinobi reported techniques failing not due to interference, but refusal, as if chakra itself no longer recognized them. Ancient seals weakened without explanation. Forgotten ruins awakened without activation. The world was remembering something it had buried. Naruto felt a familiar pressure in his chest. Not fear, but responsibility tightening its grip. This was not a problem others could solve. This was something drawn to him. He realized then that the throne behind him, forged from blades, memories, and unresolved wars, was not merely symbolic. It was an echo of an older truth. The world did not create kings to rule people. It created kings to face what people could not. Naruto Uzumaki had become more than a man, more than a shinobi, more than a symbol of peace. He had become the axis upon which the future would turn. And somewhere beyond borders and time, something ancient had begun to move, not because Naruto ruled, but because Naruto existed. The crown of silence had awakened more than order. It had awakened destiny. Naruto Uzumaki did not sleep the way ordinary men did anymore. Sleep required surrender, and kings learned early that surrender was dangerous. When rest came, it arrived in fragments, drifting moments where his body slowed but his mind remained alert, moving through layers of memory and intuition. In those moments, he felt the world pulling at him, not with urgency, but with expectation. As if reality itself had accepted him as a constant, something immovable around which all other things adjusted. That realization frightened him more than any enemy ever had. Once, power had flowed through him like fire, wild, emotional, fueled by belief. Now it moved like gravity. Silent, inevitable, unquestioned. Naruto could sense the heartbeat of the world through chakra currents that stretched far beyond any single land. When something shifted in one corner of the continent, he felt it ripple through him hours before messengers arrived. When a village elder hesitated before making a decision, Naruto felt that hesitation echo in his own chest. The world no longer acted independently. It reacted to him. That dependency weighed heavier than the throne itself. There were moments when Naruto wondered if this was what the Sage of Six Paths had felt. Standing above humanity, loving it deeply, yet knowing that closeness would only distort it further. Naruto had inherited that distance without ever asking for it. And unlike the sage, he had nowhere to retreat. The council often spoke of prosperity, of how crime had fallen, of how wars had become unthinkable. They praised the age as if it were perfect. Naruto listened, but his silence unsettled them. He saw what they could not. Prosperity without struggle bred stagnation. A world protected too completely forgot how to protect itself. Shinobi trained harder than ever, yet none of them carried the hunger that had once defined the greatest warriors. They did not train to survive. They trained to meet expectations. Naruto remembered being weak, being mocked, being alone. That pain had forged him. This generation was being forged by safety. And safety had never created legends. Sometimes, Naruto allowed himself a single indulgence. He walked, not as a king with guards and banners, but cloaked in anonymity, moving through distant regions where his presence was only rumored. He listened to conversations that stopped the moment his name was mentioned. He watched people lower their voices instinctively, as if speaking too loudly might summon him. They feared him, not as a tyrant, but as an absolute. That fear hurt more than hatred ever could. Once, a child recognized him. The boy stared, wide-eyed, frozen between awe and terror. Naruto smiled gently, the way he used to. The boy bowed instead. That simple act stayed with Naruto longer than any battle scar. The crown had erased the distance between ruler and subject, but it had also erased something else. Connection. As Naruto returned to the capital that night, he felt it again, that subtle distortion in the flow of chakra. Stronger now. Closer. Not hostile, but deliberate. Whatever was awakening beyond the known world was no longer merely observing. It was aligning itself. Naruto understood then that his rule had done more than stabilize nations. By unifying the shinobi world under a single authority, he had unknowingly created something unprecedented. A single focal point of power. And ancient forces did not ignore focal points. They converged on them. Kurama finally spoke, his voice low and measured, stripped of mockery or rage. This world has forgotten how to resist, the fox said. And you have become its shield. Naruto did not deny it. But shields crack, Kurama continued. And when they do, everything behind them breaks first. Naruto closed his eyes, breathing slowly. If that happens, he replied, then I'll take the break with me. That was the moment Naruto accepted the truth he had been avoiding. His reign would not end peacefully. No king who centralized power ever faded quietly into history. The world would demand an ending, either through succession, rebellion, or catastrophe. And something ancient was preparing to deliver that ending. Naruto rose from the throne, standing tall beneath the forest of blades behind him. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest that was not burden or duty. Resolve. If the world had shaped him into its final guardian, then he would fulfill that role completely. Not as a god, not as a tyrant, but as a man willing to stand where others could not. The crown of silence had not taken his humanity. It had tested it. And the true trial was only beginning. Naruto Uzumaki had crossed a point where doubt no longer weakened him. It sharpened him. The realization that his reign would not end quietly settled into his bones like winter, cold, unavoidable, and strangely clarifying. For years, he had ruled as if endurance alone could outlast destiny. Now he understood that endurance was only the preparation. The world was moving toward a reckoning. And it was moving because of him. He began to notice the change in subtle ways. Elders who once argued passionately now spoke with rehearsed certainty. Shinobi who once questioned orders now carried them out without hesitation. Even criminals surrendered more easily, not because they feared punishment, but because resistance felt pointless. The world had accepted inevitability. Naruto remembered a time when inevitability was something he rebelled against with everything he had. Fate, prophecy, hatred. He had broken them all by refusing to accept their limits. Now the world had placed him in the role of fate. That irony did not escape him. Ancient archives were brought before him. Scrolls sealed since before the founding of the villages, texts written in languages that resisted translation. Naruto spent hours reading them alone, fingers tracing warnings etched by hands long turned to dust. They spoke of convergence, of eras where chakra gathered around singular figures, kings, sages, conquerors, and how such convergence always awakened something older than civilization. The texts did not name these forces as evil or benevolent. They called them corrective. When balance tilted too far, the world corrected itself. Naruto closed the final scroll slowly. For the first time since becoming king, he allowed himself to feel anger, not at the world, but at its cruelty. Peace had required him to centralize power. Centralizing power had destabilized existence itself. There was no choice that did not end in consequence. Outside the capital, the land itself began to respond to his presence. Crops flourished unnaturally close to regions he visited. Storms curved subtly away from paths he traveled. Even wild animals grew quieter, watching from a distance instead of fleeing. It was as if the world had decided to keep him alive at all costs. That frightened him more than mortality ever had. Because a world that refused to let someone die would eventually demand something in return. Kurama spoke more often now, not as a beast of rage, but as a witness to patterns repeating across centuries. You're not the first, the fox said. But you may be the last who still cares. Naruto did not respond immediately. Care was a weakness kings could not afford. Yet without it, they became monsters history erased without regret. Naruto refused to become either. He began preparing not for war, but for succession, not of a throne, but of balance. He quietly decentralized certain powers, trained leaders to act independently, encouraged disagreement where obedience had grown too strong. The council resisted. The world resisted. They had grown addicted to certainty. Naruto pushed anyway. Because if the ancient force approaching him truly sought correction, then a world balanced on one man's shoulders would not survive the adjustment. And Naruto would not allow the world to break just to punish him. The signs intensified. Dreams spread across the population. Shared dreams of endless stone fields and a sky without stars. Shinobi reported sensing a presence that did not feel hostile, yet drained their will to fight. Temples older than recorded history began to hum with dormant chakra. Something was waking up. And it was not angry. It was disappointed. Naruto stood alone one evening, looking out across the land he had unified. For the first time, he did not see borders or villages or nations. He saw a fragile system that depended on one flawed human being to hold it together. Himself. I won't let you correct this world by destroying it, Naruto said softly, not knowing if he was speaking to destiny, to the ancient force, or to himself. His voice did not echo. It did not need to. The crown of silence was no longer just a symbol of rule. It had become a challenge. And Naruto Uzumaki, once the loudest voice in the world, was ready to answer it in silence.